The city was slowly exhaling. He exhaled the hustle and bustle of the day, the hum of cars, endless conversations, haste and the roar of construction projects. Evening did not descend on him immediately, but somehow reluctantly, gradually, as if thick watercolor paint was slowly spreading across the moist paper of the firmament. At first, the blue became deeper and more saturated. Then purple and plum shades appeared in it. And only then, in the deepest shadows, the night began to turn velvety. Black, and along with this darkness, lights came on in the windows of the houses, one by one, as if at the command of an invisible conductor, warm, yellow, homely, lights that promised dinner, relaxation, quiet family conversations, or just peace in the company of a book and a cup of tea. But there were other windows in this city, windows in which the light was cold, white, and businesslike. The windows behind which the day still hadn't given up. They burned longer than the others, like stubborn fireflies unwilling to acknowledge the power of the night. One of these windows was on the third floor of an old but solid building in the very center, in one of those quiet alleys where casual passers-by rarely wandered. There were no bright storefronts or noisy bars. There were only austere facades, heavy oak doors, and brass nameplates that seemed to have existed here forever. One of these signs, modest but highly polished, was engraved with the words, "Sokolov and Partners Legal Advice." It sounded solid and imposing, conjuring up a picture of a spacious office with many offices, where clerks scurry back and forth, and heated debates are taking place in the meeting rooms. But all this solidity, all these mythical partners, actually boiled down to a single person, to Viktor Andreevich Sokolov. It was he who was currently sitting at his massive oak desk, bent over another document. He was 38 years old, and he was one of those men whom time does not spoil, but only adds to their solidity. Dark hair with barely noticeable streaks of gray at the temples, a clear line of cheekbones, a strong chin. Reliability was evident in his whole appearance, in the way he held his back, and in the way he furrowed his brows in concentration. It was as solid as the old desk he'd inherited from his father, who was also a lawyer. The desk was littered with folders, blue, green, red. Many of them bore an ominous note in his own firm handwriting. Urgent. It seemed like everything in his world was urgent. People came to him with their troubles, disputes, and resentments, and each story required immediate immersion, analysis, and resolution. He was the last resort for them, a safe haven in the raging sea of everyday problems, and he devoted himself to this work without reserve. The silence in his office was almost absolute, not that ringing emptiness, but a dense, working silence filled with the rustle of papers, the barely audible hum of the computer system unit, and the ticking of an antique wall clock. They counted down the seconds, minutes, and hours, but for Sokolov himself, time seemed to have stopped. He was completely absorbed in the intricacies of legal formulations, trying to find a loophole, a weak spot in the contract that lay before him. This agreement was covered with red pen edits, like a battlefield after a fierce battle. The only living thing that occasionally disturbed this working solitude was Marina, his new assistant. She had only been working for him for the second week, but he had already appreciated her quiet, unobtrusive professionalism. The girl was frail, fair-haired, with big, serious eyes. She was 25, and sometimes it seemed to Victor that she looked like a porcelain figurine, which was terrible to accidentally touch and break. But behind this external fragility, there was a collected and very intelligent specialist. She did everything on time, accurately, and, most importantly, silently. She seemed to be able to move around the office without touching the floor, appearing and disappearing exactly when it was needed. The afternoon wore on inexorably. Victor felt fatigue begin to fill his eyelids like a leaden weight. He rubbed his eyes and looked out the window. The city has already lit its lights. They trembled and shimmered in the thickening air, creating a picture full of night magic. But that magic was out there somewhere, far away, in another life. And in his life right now there was only this contract and an acute, almost physical need for a cup of strong coffee. He pressed the selector button on his phone. "Marinaka, please bring me a cup of coffee." His voice, usually smooth and calm, now sounded a little tired, but still velvety. He did not wait for an answer, knowing that his request would be fulfilled. He was immersed in his papers again, In those endless paragraphs and sub-paragraphs that decided someone's fate, someone's millions, someone's future, it was a job for him. It's just a job. It took only a minute, maybe a little more, and he caught the subtle, invigorating aroma of freshly brewed espresso. This smell was like a lifeline for drowning in a sea of paper routine. The office door opened and closed so quietly that he didn't even look up. Marina knew how to be a shadow. He heard the light clatter of a porcelain cup on the polished surface of the table. She put it on the very edge, in the only place free of papers that she somehow always found. "Your coffee, Viktor Andreevich." Her voice was low, respectful. "Thank you," he said automatically, without taking his eyes off a particularly tricky paragraph in the document. He was already anticipating the first scalding sip, which was supposed to banish drowsiness and restore clarity of thought. He was sure that now she would leave just as quietly, and he would be left alone with his work again. But she didn't leave. A second passed, then another, then a third. He could feel her presence. He couldn't see her, but he could almost feel her. The silence in the office had changed. She stopped being working and comfortable, but became somehow tense, taut as a string in this silence. Her silence screamed louder than any words. Finally, he couldn't stand it. With a slight sigh of annoyance at being interrupted, Sokolov raised his head. Marina stood at the table, not moving from her place. She wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed somewhere to the side, her fingers. He noticed her fingers, thin, graceful. They nervously tugged at the edge of the sleeve of her strict white blouse. Her whole posture expressed an extreme degree of excitement. She looked like a frightened animal frozen in the face of danger. And then he really looked at her, not as a function, not as an assistant, but as a person. He saw that her lips were tightly compressed, and in her eyes, which she finally raised to him, there was such anxiety that he felt uneasy. "Is something wrong with you?" "What is it?" he asked softly, trying not to sound too harsh. He put down his pen, indicating that now all his attention belongs to her. She took a short, shuddering breath, as if gathering the courage to jump into the icy water. "Yes." Her voice traitorously trembled on that short word. I would like to clarify one point, regarding my work." She paused again, choosing her words. Viktor waited patiently, his initial annoyance replaced by genuine bewilderment. What could have so alarmed this always calm and collected girl? Maybe she made some mistake in the paperwork? But he checked everything. Everything was in perfect order. Maybe family problems? And then she blurted out, looking him straight in the eye, as if rushing headlong into the pool. Are you going to dismiss me? Should I start looking for a new place?" These questions hit Viktor like an avalanche in the middle of a hot July. It was so unexpected, so absurd, that for a moment he was speechless. Fire him? Her? One of the best specialists he's had in recent years? He sincerely did not understand what had bitten her, what could have given rise to such wild, completely groundless thoughts in her bright head. He looked at her carefully, trying to find in her face at least some clue to this strange situation. He saw in her eyes not only concern, but also a desperate, tiny shadow of hope, the hope that she was mistaken, that he was going to say something that would allay her fears. "Marina, may I ask what makes you think that?" "What is it?" he asked as bluntly and calmly as possible, letting her know that he was ready to listen, ready to figure it out. His calm tone seemed to affect her a little. She exhaled and, in a more even, though still agitated voice, began to explain her strange, at first glance, logic, and the more she talked, the more Viktor sank into a state close to shock. It was a world he didn't even seem to know existed. "You see," she began, still avoiding looking him in the eye, "there is a certain stereotype. Well, about the relationship between the boss and his assistant, especially the young assistant. When I told my friends that I got a job with you, they all said what to expect, that it was inevitable, all these signs of attention, compliments, hints." She faltered, a slight blush suffusing her cheeks. Viktor felt ridiculously sorry for her. He imagined this chorus of girlfriends, these omniscient experts on other people's lives, who give out their cynical advice right and left. "And this is the second week I've been here," she continued in a lower voice, "and you haven't once. Not a single hint, not a single compliment, Nothing at all. You are always extremely correct. Polite, but distant. You look at me the same way you look at this desk or at the folders with documents, as part of the office inventory. And I thought, I've come to the conclusion that you probably don't like me as a specialist, that you just don't like me as an employee, and you just don't want to complicate the inevitable dismissal with any unnecessary attention, so that it wouldn't be awkward later. She finished and fell silent, huddled into a ball, waiting for his verdict, this tirade. This incredible feminine logic, based on the advice of friends and glossy stereotypes, had an absolutely stunning effect on Victor. At first, he just stared at her, trying to process what he had heard. Then the corners of his lips twitched and crept up, revealing a slight, incredulous smile. The smile turned into a silent laugh as he imagined the whole picture. Him, buried in the inheritance business, and her, waiting every day for some vulgar signs of attention from him and, without receiving them, concluding that she was unfit. It was so ridiculous, so childishly touching, and so humanly understandable that he couldn't help himself. He leaned back in his massive leather armchair and burst out laughing. He was laughing loudly, sincerely, and heartily, as he hadn't laughed in a very long time, to the point of tears. That laugh was cleansing. He was washing away the fatigue, the tension of the last few weeks, the weight of those endless papers. He laughed at the absurdity of the situation, at silly stereotypes, at himself, who, apparently, had really turned into a mossy office relic. Marina stood there, completely baffled by his reaction. She expected anything. A cold confirmation of her guesses, a dry rebuttal, irritation, but such an outburst of Homeric merriment threw her into a stupor. She just stood there and waited for her boss to finally wake up. Her face changed expressions from fright to resentment and complete bewilderment. Finally, Victor, wiping his tears with a handkerchief, calmed down a little. He took a deep breath, trying to catch his breath, and got up from the table. He walked over to her, still unable to contain his smile. "Marinaka, I'm so sorry," he said, and there were echoes of laughter in his voice. "Really, I didn't mean to offend you, simply. You've just expressed in one sentence what other women have been puzzling over for weeks or even months. You have destroyed all my ideas about women's logic. Who, pray tell, who just invented this nonsense about the stupidity of blondes? Your logic is impeccable. It's just based on the wrong premise," he chuckled briefly again. But then, regaining control of himself, continued in a serious, warm tone. He could see that she was still tense, still not understanding what was going on, and he wanted to dispel her fears and doubts as soon as possible. "You see, what's the matter? I'm probably an old-school guy. You know, it's a kind of relic, a fossil from the last century. In my world, in my coordinate system, everything happens a little differently before. Claiming to be more than just a business relationship, I like to do everything according to the rules first, according to the good old, maybe a little naive rules. I like to invite a lady to a nice restaurant where music is playing softly and candles are burning, to go to the theater with her for an interesting premiere, just to walk around the evening city, get to know her, to talk about books, about music, about dreams, to see the sparkle in her eyes by candlelight, not under the merciless glare of this office lamp." He nodded at the lamp that coldly illuminated his desk. "I appreciate this ritual, the courtship ritual. He's important. He creates the right atmosphere, the right mood. He turns an ordinary acquaintance into something more, into the beginning of a story. And to start the story with banal signs of attention in the workplace. It's like reading a good book from the last page. It's vulgar and uninteresting." He paused, giving her a chance to process what he'd said. He was looking at her with a completely different look now, not as an assistant, but as a woman, a very beautiful and, as it turned out, very interesting woman. "To be honest, I like you very much," he continued in a quieter voice. "I noticed this on the very first day when you entered this office for an interview. You were so serious, so focused, and at the same time there was something light about you, but, to my great regret, that damned inheritance case came down on me that very day. It's a very complicated story, an old family, a lot of money, and even more grievances, and for the last few weeks, I've literally been living in these papers. I fall asleep thinking about wills and wake up thinking about gift deeds. I just physically had neither the time nor the energy, nor If you will, the moral right to think about something else. I should have closed this story first. His words, his frankness, acted on Marina like a warm, soothing balm for the soul. The tension slowly released her. She seemed to be thawing, her shoulders straightened, her compressed lips relaxed, and a timid, uncertain smile appeared on her face. So he won't fire you, so it's not about her, so it's quite the opposite. This realization was so pleasant, so relieving. So if you'll be a little patient, he added with a warm, almost fatherly intonation, then I think I'll finally close this project in a couple of days. And then we'll catch up with you, and let's start by following the rules from the restaurant. And don't even think about quitting. You are an excellent specialist, precise, executive, smart, and I have no intention of parting with you. Absolutely not. Well, what do you say? Do you agree to wait? I'll wait, Marina replied with a charming, already quite bold smile. The world fell back into place. The worries were gone, leaving only joy and some kind of pleasant anticipation. She suddenly felt like she was in charge of the situation. Your coffee seems to be getting cold. Let me get you a fresh one. She took a step forward and reached for the cup that she had brought herself. It seemed like an eternity ago, but he stopped her with a gesture. Leave it. I like it cold too, sometimes even more than hot. It's invigorating in a different way. He picked up the cup and walked around the table to the window. He took a sip. The coffee was already icy and bitter, but now the bitterness was even pleasant. He looked at the night city, at the scattering of lights, which now did not seem alien and distant to him. They were part of his world, a world in which something important has happened right now, in his office, something that changed the usual course of things. Marina had already taken a step towards the door, intending to disappear quietly, as she knew how, but a sudden, mischievous thought made her freeze in place. She stood there for a second, as if weighing something on an invisible scale. Then she turned around resolutely. She walked over to Victor, who was still standing by the window, almost right next to her, so close that he could smell the subtle scent of her perfume. He turned around in surprise. She looked straight into his eyes, and there was no longer any fear or timidity in her gaze, just warm, playful confidence. Victor Andreevich, she said in a low, enveloping voice, in which mischievous sparkles danced, while you're finishing your iced coffee, let me make a small advance about our future trip to the restaurant, as an incentive, so to speak, so that you can think better about your inheritance business. He saw in her gaze such a soft, but at the same time unshakable determination that he immediately realized that he would not be able to refuse this offer, and he won't want to. All his principles, all his old school, seemed to him in an instant not so important. He felt his throat go dry, trying to preserve the remnants of his solidity, his image of a relic. He replied hoarsely, I would gladly refuse. But I'm afraid you'll start thinking about quitting again, and I can't risk such a valuable specialist. She accepted his surrender with a quiet smile of victory, and at that moment, the night outside the window seemed to become even deeper, and the lights of the city became even brighter. There was a restaurant, a theater, and walks ahead of them. There was a whole story ahead of them, and it didn't start according to the rules. It started right here and now, with the smell of cold espresso and one very bold advance.